Hello, my favorite listener. Welcome back into the Dark of the Woods. This is Hermit of the Pines, Episode 3, a Rust Belt Studio production. Rust Belt Studio is proud to bring you two other shows as well, Mikey and the Garden Arch, and The Engine of War. Mikey's story is first person and is a whimsical jaunt of a 12-year-old sucked into a magical world. Engine of War is a low fantasy driven by steam, spark, and all things grit. You can find these shows on opposite Tuesdays, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, settle in. The show is about to start. The storm came in soft at first, flakes tumbling without sound. By afternoon it thickened, driven by the wind, each flake sharp as grit. The woods blurred, trees narrowing to gray trunks, and the ground already packed with 4 inches and rising. The 3 students pressed on. Jonah's breath showed in bursts, scarf damp with condensation. Riley kept one ear cupped over her headphones, listening to the forest. Casey carried the camera cradled against his chest now, lens turned in, snow speckling its body. The storm didn't come all at once. It crept along. At first, the flakes seemed harmless, drifting sideways like dust motes shaken from some higher shelf. The trees held their shape then, dark against the sky, the ridges clear and sharp. The air had that faint metallic brightness that makes you think it might pass. But the snow kept on. It thickened in layers slow enough that you hardly noticed until the world had gone dim around you. The flakes were different now, harder, edged. They hissed when they struck coats, stung when they landed on cheeks. The students stopped talking. Their voices would have needed shouting, and shouting felt like surrender. Jonah's scarf was wet at the edge, fibers stiffening with frost. He pulled it higher and breathed through wool, every exhale fogging against his skin. Riley's headphones set crooked, one ear tucked close, the other cupped by her hand. She tilted her head as if the storm might be carrying a message. Snow on fabric muffled even the hiss of her recorder, and she pressed a mittened finger to the mic, listening to the blank sound of weather. Casey cradled the camera close to his chest, lens turned in still, coat wrapped over it like a child. He kept glancing down, brushing snow from its body, each time a little sharper. Casey cradled the camera close to his chest, lens turned in still, coat wrapped over it now like a child. He kept glancing down, brushing snow from its body, each time a little sharper, as though the storm were a rival trying to smother his work. "Half an hour more," Casey muttered finally, but the words felt like they sank rather than carried. Nobody answered. Jonah couldn't think about time, not in minutes. He thought about feet, steps taken. How far between one tree and the next? How far from where they were to where they began? How much snow packed under his boot? The woods were closing down in front of them. Pines that had seemed tall and orderly now blurred into one another, gray trunks and curtains of white. Branches groaned under the weight. Every so often a clump slid loose, dropped heavily into the hush. Jonah imagined how the trail would look in another hour. It'd be gone. Even now it seemed less a path than a guess. He could feel himself slowing, not from fatigue exactly, but from doubt. It was hard to walk into nothing. Riley's voice, thin under her scarf. "We need to find cover. We need to stop." She didn't say where. She didn't need to. Every tree looked the same, and none of them were shelter. Casey lifted his chin like he'd been accused. "There's supposed to be a bend up ahead. Valley cut. Maybe it'll give us something." He said it with the authority of someone who didn't want to be questioned, and Jonah kept moving because stopping wasn't an option. He tried not to think about how storms like this built weight, how 6 inches could be 12 by morning, how drifts could smother a tent. He tried not to think about bears either. Winter should have pulled them under by now, but he didn't know enough about the cycle to be sure. The thought made the woods lean darker, every hollow a den waiting to wake. Snow clung to the students' lashes, melted, froze again. Their boots squeaked, sank, squeaked again. The sound was the only proof of progress, a rhythm that said forward. Behind them, the storm already had erased a thin line of prints. Jonah pulled out his pencil and notebook, and with a shaking hand wrote, "Storm closing fast, trail vanishing, each step deeper." He pressed the pencil harder than he meant to. The lead was almost breaking. The wind picked up, pushing at them from the side. Jonah hunched against it, scarf eyes stiff. Riley tucked her chin into her coat, and Casey leaned forward like a man breaking waves. The valley came slow, the trees parting in uneven gaps, the ground dipping low. The snow thickened at the bend, swirling, pulled in by the lay of the land. The trail sloped into a cut bank, and a shallow cave opened in the clay wall, barely more than an overhang, but enough to blunt the wind. They looked at one another, then they ducked in. They stepped at the lip of the opening, snow gusting past their shoulders, each of them waiting for someone else to declare it safe. The cave wasn't much, more of a gouge in the earth than anything permanent. It had the look of something scraped raw by water once and then forgotten, a shallow wound in the hillside. Casey squinted into it, camera hugged tight to his chest. "Shouldn't be deep enough for anything," he said, but he didn't move in any farther. Jonah bent, picked up a fist-sized rock, and tossed it inside. The stone clattered, bounced once, then rolled to silence. No snarl, no sudden shift of shadow. He let out a breath he hadn't even known he was holding and said, "No bear, at least." Riley pushed past them, ducking under the slope of earth. She swung her recorder like a divining rod, capturing the hollow hiss of wind curling through the overhang. The sound was different here, not quite echo, but something older, air that had rubbed against the stone for years. The others followed. The ceiling smoked with soot from decades before, black streaks rising like memories. Jonah set his pack down, fingers numb. He noticed small things, a stone worn smooth where someone's hand might rest, bark scraps tucked into a corner. This wasn't a place found. This was a place kept. He looked about the ceiling and he looked at that black soot. Not fresh, but not decades either. Jonah ran his glove across it, flakes of charred dust coming away easily. Someone had burned fires here, many times over, and not that long ago. The floor was packed harder than the slope outside, tamped down by boots or paws or both. Jonah crouched, pressing a palm into the cold ground, feeling how smooth it ran in places, as if something heavy had settled there often. He told himself it was deer bedding. He didn't quite believe it. Casey set his pack down with a grunt, still glancing toward the entrance like the cave might change its mind and spit them back out into the storm. He wiped his lens again, though he hadn't taken the camera out. "It's better than nothing," he muttered, which was as close as he got to relief. They pulled out 2 butane heaters from their packs. The hiss of blue flame filled the space, casting thin light that torched the stone. The heaters gave off more comfort than heat, a sound of survival. When Riley thumbed the switch and the flame hissed alive, Jonah felt the sound before he felt the heat, a faint tremor in the enclosed space, a presence larger than it had any right to be. The blue glow reached the soot stains, painted them briefly alive before fading back into dull black. The cave filled with scents. Damp wool, wet earth, the faint chemical bite of gas. Jonah found himself cataloging them the way he'd cataloged the trail, small facts to be logged, made orderly. He wrote one line in his notebook, kept not found. Riley held her recorder close. "Camp. Day 2, she whispered. "Storm. Shelter found. Traces of prior use." Snow gathered at the lip of the cave, blowing sideways. The day dimmed into dusk before they realized it. That was when he appeared. No warning, no crunch of approach. One moment the mouth of the cave was an open smear of white, and the next a man stood there cut from the gray. He didn't look dramatic, that was the worst part of it. His face was plain, unremarkable in every way except that it shouldn't have been there at all. Pale skin gone ruddy with cold, eyes flat, colorless in the dim. Hair long enough to mat against his collar, damp with melted snow. His coat looked stitched together from a dozen lives, one sleeve plaid, another canvas duck, the chest patched with scraps of flannel and corduroy. Bits of different seasons sewn into one skin, the fabric sagged heavy with the weather. Jonah's eyes caught on the feet. Bark and old leather wrapped tight, but over them, mismatched socks, one striped, one gray. Those were Casey's socks. The very ones he'd left on the stump last night. The sight hollowed him out. The man stepped forward, quiet as a drift. He carried something in his hands, and for a moment Jonah thought it might be a weapon, but no, it was a pair of mittens. Wool, patched with clumsy yarn. He crouched, set them on a flat stone by the heaters, the gesture so simple it felt foreign. An offering? An apology? Jonah couldn't tell. The heaters hissed, their blue flame painted his cheeks, made his eyes glassy. He tilted his head at them, studying the fire the way a man might study a crippled animal. His lips parted, then closed again, then finally rasped. Storm. His voice cracked dry like it hadn't been used in weeks. You stay. Then you go. The silence that followed was too large for the cave. Casey jerked like the words had struck him, and he fumbled for his camera half out of the bag, instinct taking over. But Riley caught his wrist hard, pressing the lens back down. Not now, she mouthed, sharp. Jonah wrote, hand trembling. First words. Storm. Stay. Go. The hermit's gaze shifted, skimming each of them in turn. He didn't linger and didn't seem to weigh them as people. It was more like he was taking attendance, confirming that what had come into this woods was still here. Casey, desperate to fill the space, held up a packet of jerky. You hungry? His voice cracked in the middle, too loud. The man's head snapped once, sharp. No food. 2 words clipped. He shut his mouth after, lips pressing together as if they might spill more if they were left open. The heaters hissed on. The wind pressed on. No one else said anything at all. Jonah wanted to ask 1,000 things. Who are you? How long have you lived out here? Why the socks? But his tongue wouldn't move. Something about the man demanded silence, as though words themselves might be a trespass. The hermit never sat, never moved closer. He stood just inside the threshold, letting the snow cake his shoulders. This cave was not his, but it had been his at one time. He was more than willing to let them borrow it for the moment, and they were more than happy to have it. Time stretched and the storm pressed harder. Snow built up against the back of his legs. He still didn't flinch. He looked less like a visitor and more like a figure cut out of the storm itself, placed here only for them to see. Finally, and with no gesture, no signal, he stepped backward. 1 pace, then another. Then he was gone, swallowed whole by the driving wind and the falling snow. Jonah moved first, stumbling to the mouth, looking out, nothing. Just white and wind. No prints that he could see, no figure against the trees. Riley whispered into her recorder, voice faint. "He came. He left. Mittens left behind, spoke 4 words. She didn't play them back. She didn't want to. The mitten sat folded neat on the stone, steam faintly rising in the warmth. Jonah stared at them, unable to decide if they were a gift or a warning. The cave felt emptier when he was gone, but the space really hadn't changed. It was just the 3 of them, the hiss of fuel, and the mittens folded like a riddle no one wanted to solve. They tried not to talk, but silence can carry its own weight. Casey leaned back against the wall, chewing his lip raw. He kept glancing at the entrance as if the man might reappear at any second. Finally, he said, "I can't believe you didn't let me get him on film." Riley held the recorder to her chest, switched it off now as though even the machine needed rest, and looked at him and said, "Why? What would you have recorded?" Jonah stared at the mittens. Every time his eyes left them, he found them again. They unrolled their sleeping bags and sleep came ragged. The storm wailed against the hillside, snow shook loose in heavy thuds. More than once, Jonah thought he heard movement, something soft dragging over the snow outside. He'd press his ear to the ground, breathe shallow, but never stood back up and didn't really want to look out. Morning came thin, the storm spent but not gone. A pale light seeped into the cave, outlining their packs. The folded mittens still sat waiting. Jonah was first outside. His boots sank deep into 6 inches of snow, each step a muffled collapse. He crouched low, studying the ground. Prints cut circles around the cave, overlapping, wandering, then breaking off. The socks blurred the edges, but the shape was wrong anyway. Too long, too narrow, at times dragging like a man half asleep, at times stretching with a stride no tired body could ever manage. Jonah took out his pencil again. He circles us at night. Day comes, he moves slower. Casey stood at the lip of the cave, camera in hand but not raised. His shoulders were stiff, jaw set hard. He muttered again, "You should have let me film him." But it wasn't quite loud enough for an argument, and no one answered him. The mittens lay there for a moment. The 3 of them looked as though they would leave them in the sun, but finally Riley bent and scooped them up. Their food was low. Their energy was lower. It was time to go. Hello again. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Hermit of the Pines, a Rust Belt Studio production. This episode was written and performed by Bryan Foster. Rust Belt Studio is also proud to bring you 2 other shows, Mikey and the Garden Arch and The Engine of War. One, a high fantasy hero quest. The other, a low fantasy gritty moral drama. Both are done every Tuesday opposite each other. If you'd like to support the studio, the listens do help. Liking helps as well. Sharing it with someone who might be interested goes a very long way. But if you'd like to do more to help us move forward, you can join our Patreon, and the link is in the show notes below. At the $2 grip level, you will get 1-day early access and ad-free episodes from all of our major shows. If you'd like to move up to the $5 projectionist level, that'll get you in the booth. There, you'll get once-a-month featurettes, as well as other bonus content that we put out specifically for our patrons. At $9, you become an executive producer, and you can help shape the studio. Either way, thank you very much for being here, and until next time, my favorite listener.